Segment 8.2 bait, snapshot of a sample Hifil verb in the Yiktol conjugation. The verb that we'll be employing is shalach, shin, lamed, kaf. Ashlich, ashlich. Tashlich, tashlich. Tashlichi, tashlichi. Yashlich, yashlich. Tashlich, tashlich. Nashlich, nashlich. Tashlichu, tashlichu. Tashlechna, tashlechna. Yashlichu, yashlichu. Tashlechna, tashlechna. Here is a list that will point out the fundamental features that distinguish verbs known as weak verbs when it comes to the Hifil Yiktol conjugation. Let's look at this line by line. The first line illustrates with the regular verb, the same one found in the snapshot, ashlich. The patak vowel we wish to point out in the prefix. We might also point out the hirik yod infix. Incidentally, to the right of the Yiktol, the katal is furnished simply for purposes of comparison. For a shoresh beginning with an yod, we'll routinely find that there is a holam vav supplied. And as is pointed out in the footnote, this signals that the verb in question was actually an original first vav. In the case of those verbs which are genuinely first yod, the yod will persist even in the Hifil Yiktol. It would not convert to a holam vav. Next, consider first nun verbs. The verb we'll use as sample is agid, agid. Here we find that the first nun of the shoresh nagad will assimilate, leaving behind a dagesh in the second radical, in this case in the gimel. Next, consider verbs which are third yod-he. These verbs will prevent the characteristic Hifil infix vowel of hirik yod. So with the sample verb a'aleh, notice that after the second radical, lamed, we do not find a hirik yod, but rather segol he. Finally, consider verbs whose shoresh consists of a yod or a vav in the second radical, hollow verbs. In most cases, these will display the hirik yod, as in the verb asir, asir. Here's a list of Hifil verbs in the Yiktol conjugation. You'll be able to draw from these to assist with the activity that follows in the next segment. Please notice that the verbs have been grouped based on whether or not their consonants will cause characteristic shifts. With the first three, we find that there is relatively no change. We'll be reading these simply by the first common singular form. Akriv, akriv. Ashlich, ashlich. Ashmia, ashmia. In that last form, because of the third guttural, that is the letter ayin, we do find the furtive patach inserted before the ayin, just as we found in other conjugations of the same shoresh. Next, you'll find two examples of first yod verbs. Otzi, otzi. Oshia, oshia. Notice here the first yod is becoming a holam vav. Next, there are four verbs that are all first nun. Agid, agid. Akeh, akeh. Apil, apil. Atzil, atzil. Notice that the first nun was assimilated, leaving behind a dagesh in the second radical letter. So with the verb agid, a dagesh in the gimel. The case of akeh does not display the hirik yod vowel. This is due to the fact that akeh is not only first nun, but also third yod-he. The next group of three verbs is characterized by being third yod-he. A'aleh, a'aleh. Ar'eh, ar'eh. Arbeh, arbeh. Notice in each case that the third yod-he prevents the hirik yod vowel from being inserted. Instead, these forms close with a segol he. The last group of verbs are hollow verbs. Avi, avi, amit, amit, asir, asir, akim, akim, ashiv, ashiv. Notice in each case that the infixed hirik yod vowel takes the place of the second radical. The last feature which we'll want to observe regarding the yiktol conjugation in the Hifil binyan pertains only to third masculine singular forms, and only when those forms are expressed as vayiktol, not yiktol, but vayiktol. Most of the time with these we find that the hirik yod vowel will compress to a tzere. Sometimes the hirik yod vowel will appear as something other than tzere, but most often it will convert to a tzere. These forms are considered shortened, or more technically, apocryphated forms. So where we might expect to read vayashlich with hirik yod, we find instead vayashlech with tzere. There is no change in meaning, simply a compression of the spelling. Let's read over a collection of these. We'll read first the yiktol in the hifil, and then the vayiktol, and notice the change of the theme vowel. All of these are third masculine singular. That's the only form for which the hifil vayiktol apocopation occurs. Yavi, yavi. And now the apocryphated form as a vayiktol, vayave, vayave. Moving to the left, Yoshia, Yoshia. And now the apocryphated form, Vayosha, Vayosha. Notice that the accent has also moved towards the front of the syllable. Yamit, Yamit. Vayamet, Vayamet. Ya'aleh, Ya'aleh. Vaya'al, Vaya'al. Here we have lost the final syllable entirely, resulting in Vaya'al. Yakriv, Yakriv. Vayakrev, Vayakrev. There we find the tzere taking over in place of the hirik yod. And now the second group. Yagid, Yagid. Vayaged, Vayaged. Yakeh, Yakeh. Vayach, Vayach. Please notice that the only signal alerting us to the shoresh in this particular verb form is the kaf. For the first nun and the third yod-he, both are lost. This form is worth learning to recognize in its shortness simply by the kaf. It traces to nakah, meaning to strike. Yasir, Yasir. Vayasar, Vayasar. Yakim, Yakim. Vayakem, Vayakem. Vayashlich, Vayashlich. Vayashlech, Vayashlech.